Jennifer Heim with SST2. So thanks for joining us for the very first IEP happy hour. So without further delay, what I wanted to share with you first, let me actually get my screen ready here so that I can see everybody, is that every SST around the state has the privilege and honor to recognize outstanding students and staff in the area of special education. So the R.A. Horn Award recognizes efforts of our students with disabilities, and the Franklin B. Walter Award recognizes the efforts and hard work of our staff members that serve students with disabilities. We would love to have your nominations if you work in Erie, Huron, and Lorain counties. We would love to have you nominate maybe a student or a teaching team. Oops, I'm very sorry. I didn't mean to click that ahead of time. And so you can see those links there. Stacy or Danielle, could you maybe throw those links in the chat as you get a moment? I would appreciate that. Okay. All right. I am going to go through so the cover page and sections 1 through 4 today. I will pause at the end of each of those each of those sections so that we can pause for questions. And I am going to record today's session so that we can post it. On our,
Jen, we're already recording. We're good.
Already, thank you. Yeah, okay, thank you. I thought I had to turn it on, but it's like it's already recording. Fantastic. Okay. All right. So without further delay, we're going to, like I said, we're going to start with the cover page. And you know, one of the associations I made was, let's start at the very beginning, right? And that took my head to Julie Andrews and the Son of Music, right? Start at the very beginning. So if we're looking at the front, at that cover page, we're looking at that child's information, right? So we're going to make, to make sure that that information is accurate. Let me get to the point where I can see my screen. Okay, fantastic. So the SSID number, we want to make sure that that is in there accurately. And we have that student's, demographic information, and also their date of birth. And this information is, that's on the cover page, is really important because it is, a lot of that information here will become part of the EMIS record that districts submit for annual reporting. So the accuracy of that is quite important. So let's go down and talk about what the district of residence and the district of service is. So the district of residence is that district in which the student resides. And that district of residence is responsible for ensuring that the IEP is developed and implemented for each child with a disability residing in that school district. Districts that have students who are educated outside of their school buildings, outside of their district, are still responsible for initiating and documenting those meetings for the purpose of developing and reviewing and revising that IEP. So that district of residence must maintain communication with the district of service. And the district of service is the district in which the student is served. Sometimes those are the same if that student is served within that district. If that student is served outside of their district of residence, in a different district of service, the district of residence is still responsible for ensuring that that IEP is developed and implemented. A difference to this is regarding community schools. Those community schools will be the district of residence. And when a community, but the difference is when a community school places a child in a separate facility, the community school remains the district of residence and continues to be responsible for the education of that child. So the district of service is that the district of residence is a district that's responsible for implementing services contained in the IEP. So on this very first section, we have to answer some questions. Is the child in preschool? Yes or no? Will the child be 14 before the end of the IEP? Is the child younger than 14 years of age, but has a transition and post-secondary goal information? We also have to answer yes or no. Is a child a ward of the state? And if yes, providing the name of the surrogate parent. And if the child is transitioning from Part C to Part B, so early intervention to Part B, is this the IEP? Is the IEP placed by the child's 3rd birthday? So those are the important parts on this first section. So kind of going across that first cover page, so this meeting information box, the meeting date is the date that the IEP team met. That's the date you're going to record there in that box. Under the meeting type, you will check at least one of those boxes to indicate that meeting type. So it's either an initial IEP, an annual review, a review other than an annual review, keeping in mind that the IEP is a working document and can be reviewed at any point. And then also checking if it's an amendment. We'll talk about amendments in a little bit. And then the other point to know, the other on here, is if a transition plan is included in the IEP, that other box must also be checked and then transition written on that line. So that's a little, maybe an unknown piece or not so well known. All right, so going down on that cover page, is that box that we need to document IEP timelines. So the first one is ETR completion date, and that is going to be the date that the last ETR was signed. As you know, the next ETR would be due in 3 years, so it would be the date of the last ETR plus that was signed plus 3 years. The IEP effective dates. So the start date will be the first date the IEP will be implemented, and it will end on the meeting date plus 364 days. So you can see at the note at the bottom, it says an IEP cannot be active for more than 364 days from when the IEP was agreed upon and signed by that IEP team. And then the next IEP review date is going to be that same meeting date plus 364 days. So kind of in a nutshell, what this means is that at least once a year, the IEP team is required to meet unless the child turns 22, tests out of services, receives a diploma, or the parent revokes consent, right? And I mentioned before that IEP is a working document and that IEP team is encouraged to meet throughout the year if the child is making progress and has met his or her goals, or doesn't make progress, and not wait until the annual IEP review meeting time to make any necessary changes. Okay, so I think that's all I wanted to say about that slide. So then this next section, moving over to the left on the cover page, is parent guardian information. That's pretty cut and dry. But in that other information section, you'll want to include information here the most important information someone would need to know about the student. So we could pick this up and get that most important information. So if there's behavior concerns, if there's medical concerns, maybe if that student is attending school with adjusted school hours or days, maybe any self-care needs, or if there's any court directives in relation to the student, that all would want to be added here. Okay, so I'm gonna stop there and take a look at the chat and see if there's any questions. I don't see any questions in the chat. So it seems like any
And
questions?
there are no specific questions to the material, but there are questions in regards to if people are going to be able to receive slides from the training. So after the training, the slides and the recording will be shared out as well.
Yep. Yeah. And so I'll actually be posting those on our website. So yeah, thanks for saying that, Stacy. Okay, let me go back over to where okay, so this next section, the IEP form status. This is just your checklist to keep yourself organized of when these sections are complete. So just a helpful tool that's embedded in that IEP to help you. Okay, so there's a question, what if the other information is within the profile? Should it be in other information and in the profile? I have the worst time getting audio. How do I sign in? Okay, okay, Stacy's gonna answer that question about signing in. The other information is within the profile. I think, you know, if we go back and we look at this other information, some of this you're going to want to also put in the profile, but if there's really, really important information that someone that's picking this up initially doesn't know the student would need to see. Okay, so that's the purpose of that other information. Okay, I talked about IEP form status. Okay, let's go on, talk about amendments really quick. So let me just make sure I'm looking at the chat. So there's a clarifying question. Yeah, so back here, oops, sorry, back here in the meeting information section, and Danielle, you answered the question, thank you. So I'll say it out loud so that's on the recording. So the question is, so a student who is 14 or will be 14 during that IEP, you must check other. And yes, that's correct. And then you're going to be writing a transition plan, and then you're going to write transition on that line that says other. Yeah, thanks for clarifying. Thanks for throwing it in there, Danielle. Appreciate it. Okay, so let's talk about amendments for, oops, sorry. Becoming a happy clicker, sorry. Okay, let's talk about amendments before we go on to section 1. So that is actually the bottom of the cover page, obviously. And the help is you only complete this if you're amending the IEP. So in this box, you're going to include the IEP section that you're amending. You're going to summarize what those amendments, those following changes look like. In the date of amendment, you're going to cite the date that the team met to amend, the participants in that meeting and their role, and then initials. So keeping in mind that when you're amending an IEP, keep in mind that you also have to revise the meeting date on the cover page to match the date the team met for the amendment. And of course, you're also going to want to do a PRO1. While that start date changes for the IEP, the end date does not change. So in other words, we talked about the IEP does not last, the duration is not longer than 364 days. So the amending it does not lengthen the duration of the IEP. and in section 7, which I know we're not going to talk about section 7 today, that's on an IEP happy hour coming to you soon. But those start dates only need to be changed if the amendment alters something in one of those areas. So one of the questions that often arises is who needs to attend that amendment meeting? And so I actually reached out to someone at ODE in the Office for Exceptional Children to get this like official answer, because I wanted to give you 100% accurate information. So the information that was relayed was that discussion of an IEP amendment shows up 2 places in the Federal Register. So that's within IDEA. And it talks about when making changes to that IEP after the annual IEP meeting date. And it talks about that the parents of a child with a disability and the LEA, the local education agency, may agree not to convene an IEP team meeting for the purpose of making those changes, but can instead develop a written document to amend and modify the IEP. And then, so those IEP changes are made, and the school district ensures that the IEP team is informed of those changes. Kind of the bottom line is that that the IEP team could be convened to amend the IEP, or the district rep or their designee on behalf of the district could contact the parent, and if the parent agrees, the IEP can be amended. This can be done via telephone or email or Zoom, Google Meet, as well as in person. But the rest of the IEP team needs to be informed of that amendment, and a copy of the amended IEP, and then the prior written notice is issued to the parent before implementing the amendment. So that language is also reflected in the Ohio operating standards. So hopefully that clarifies that a little bit. I know it's always kind of a gray area of who attends that amendment meeting, or who needs to attend. Okay. Let me open my chat window back up again. Are there any questions about that? That applies to signatures as well. Donna, are you can you clarify what your question is? You can either unmute or type. Oh, district rep and parent only need to sign, correct. If you add to the IEP for an amendment, do you change the start date? Yes, so that start date changes and the end date does not change. Yeah, okay. Okay, very good. Never seem to have enough windows when you're running a Zoom meeting here. Okay.
Hi,
Yeah,
I just want to know how to sign in. It will not let me do it. It says cannot sign in during the meeting.
okay, so looks like Stacy put the link back in the chat. Are you
I
able
did that.
to?
It says site cannot be reached.
Tina, I'll message right now.
Okay. Okay. So it sounds like Stacy's going to help you with that. Sorry about that. Okay. So let's go to section 1, future planning. This section should include a statement, obviously, that discusses the child's future, and that IEP team's job is to make sure that the family and the child's preferences and interests are reflected and are an essential part of the planning process of the IEP. You'll want to always obtain current parent and student input. There's a caveat that that section can be completed prior to the meeting as long as you've gathered information. You can complete this as long as you're gathering the information before the meeting. And then for students who are transition age, you'll need to include information about where the student will live. That needs to be included in that future planning section as well. Okay. Any questions about the future planning section? We've all had to practice extending our wait time on Zoom calls because it might take a moment for someone to type in a question. So I'm going to practice that wait time. Okay, I don't see any and I don't hear any, so we'll go on. Okay, so our favorite section, speaking of myself, section 2. And there's always a lot of questions about section 2, so I'll spend a little more time on this section. So, section 2 is about special instructional factors, and I put a big blue arrow by that statement that says items checked yes will be addressed in the IEP. So this is what, if you ever are under district review and Office for Exceptional Children is looking at some of your IEPs, everything that's checked yes in this section will be expected to be found somewhere in the IEP, right? Because these are all factors that we're saying, yes, this is a piece that needs to be addressed. And so it needs to show up in some way, shape, or form in the IEP. So let's talk about each of these in detail a little bit. So the first item is often a hot button, right? Does the child have behavior which impedes his or her learning or the learning of others? So in this, to this question, you're basically considering whether that student's behavior impedes that child's learning or the learning of other students. You'll also take into consideration any PBIS strategies that might be in place to support that student's behavior. Behavior doesn't automatically mean there's a need for an FBA or behavior plan. So you're just going to address it in the appropriate sections of the IEP. You don't even need a goal for the behavior. But if you're going to check that, yes, the child's behavior impedes his learning, then it needs to be addressed somewhere in the IEP, maybe as far as, like I said, PBIS strategies, or maybe you are going to complete an FBA. The FBA, the functional behavior assessment, doesn't necessarily mean you're going to write a behavior plan. So it's just going to depend on that student. No, so the question in the box is, if you check that box, do you need to have a behavior goal? No, you have to address the student's behavior somewhere in the IEP, right? So like I said, maybe that is that you're going to conduct a functional behavior assessment. So I did put a link in here to a podcast that Walter Haverfield did a little bit ago. And I'll put that in we'll put that link in the chat for you. So you also have that. And Danielle has her hand up. Go for it, Danielle.
Sorry, Jen, I didn't want to jump in over you.
No.
Just to clarify with this, there's a difference. Obviously, we always talk about best practice versus what is legal to do. So no, you don't have to have a behavior goal. No, you don't have to have an FBA, but as Jen just said, you have to address it somewhere. So if you do listen to this podcast, what they talk about is best practice. So best practice is Perhaps you are doing an FBA, but not necessarily going as far as a behavior plan yet. Perhaps you are just working on this in the goal and SDI, but somewhere you have to be doing something on it. So again, best practice would be to start looking at that FBA, but it is not, it's not mandatory to put in order to go to the BIP.
All right, thanks so much, Danielle. I appreciate it. Okay, so let's talk about the next one is, does the child have limited English proficiency? And so this question just asks us to consider the language needs of the child with limited English proficiency. And this is not referring to students who are nonverbal, right? And again, if this is checked, that needs to be addressed somewhere in that student's IEP. The next one is about if the child is blind or visually impaired. And so in this case, the IEP team is, so in the case of a student who is blind or visually impaired, the IEP team must provide for instruction in Braille unless the team determines that Braille instruction is not appropriate yet for that child, perhaps, and ensures that requirements for IEPs with students with visual impairments are implemented and provided. And so there's also an additional section that must be completed. If this is checked yes, we must complete section 15. And I will, so looks like Stacy already dropped that in the chat. So it's kind of amazing. So the words come out of my mouth and automatically things appear in the chat. So that's pretty cool. So thank you, Stacy. So this is section 15 that is completed when an IEP team checks that visual impairment question. Yes, the child's blind or visually impaired. So again, it's just trying to ensure that that student has access to instruction in Braille. Actually, no, it's section 15. So someone in the chat asked section 16, and I believe it's section 15, unless I have my numbers wrong, which is possible. Okay. All right. So if someone can fact check that, I appreciate it. I thought it was section 15. Oh, yes, it is 16. Okay, thanks for the clarification. Sorry for that miscommunication. Section 16. Okay. All right, so the next section is, does the child have communication needs? And in parentheses, required for deaf or hearing impaired. So I know there's a lot of questions about this, the statement or this question that we have to answer. So I know that I've heard people at the Office for Exceptional Children talking about that this question could be worded a little bit better, and it might on future IEP revisions, who knows. But the full language is that we have to consider the communication needs of the child. And in the case of a child who is deaf or hard of hearing, consider the child's language and communication needs, opportunities for direct communications with peers and professionals, professional personnel, and their full range of needs, including opportunities for direct instruction in the child's language and communication mode. So then the question is about a communication plan. For whom does the communication plan need to be completed? And the response from OEC is the communication plan is completed for any student who is receiving special education services through an IEP with documented hearing loss, including deaf, blind, deaf, hearing impaired, plus any additional disability, including auditory processing, conductive, sensory, or neural, unilateral, bilateral hearing losses. And so again, the Office for Exceptional Children, if you're going through supports and monitoring, that if this is checked yes, that they're going to be looking for a communication plan or a communication goal for that student. Just like any of these others, they'll be looking for those. Okay. All right. Going on to talk about the question regarding assistive technology devices or services. So I know this is another question that has a lot of, raises a lot of questions around it. So I'm going to take a couple of minutes to talk about assistive technology a little bit, not very in-depth at all. So this is a really high-level overview, but just to think about how you would answer this question. Often IEP teams kind of have that initial reaction just to check this box, no. But before you do that, we have to think about what that full range of assistive technology is. And it's more than just communication, right? So when we think about assistive technology, we think about devices and services. So let me talk about assistive technology devices first, and those can support students to be either more independent or perform at a higher level in regards to writing or reading, communication, math, computer access. You can see all those areas there. So the field of assistive technology is much broader than just communication or even just access to reading and writing. So we have to consider all of those pieces, right? So when we're answering that question, we have to think about all these components, not just communication. And then when we think about assistive technology tools, they're categorized in 3 ways. So we talk about low tech, mid tech, and high tech. Knowing that low tech are things that are non-electronic, right? Those items may be really inexpensive. It might be a 25-cent pencil grip or a slant board, but that might be the tool the student needs in order to participate in a skill or demonstrate a skill that they couldn't otherwise do. Mid-tech are battery operated devices, maybe a talking calculator or a spell checker, or maybe a battery operated communication system. A high-tech are those more complex electronic systems. Maybe it's a screen reader for a student who is blind, or portable electronic magnifier, or more of a high-tech communication It's a very broad field. What is assistive technology for one student may not be assistive technology for another student. So if it's the federal definition is an item or piece of equipment that improves, increases, or maintains the functional capabilities of that student. So a tool for one student might just be that everyone in the class uses a Chromebook because that's what they use. But a student who can't otherwise access another device, that Chromebook could be assistive technology for them. So it's not what it is, it's actually how that student uses it, whether it's considered assistive technology. So, and then we also have to think about, remember that question asks, does that student require, does the student need AT devices or services? And assistive technology is also a service. So you can see that definition there. It's a service that directly assists a child with a disability in the selection, acquisition, and use of an AT device. So this term includes evaluation, providing for, so that might be, obtaining somehow, right? Customizing a system for a student, coordinating with other therapies or some interventions, training for the child in the use of that device or tool, and training for the professionals, service providers, or family members that support that child. Let me go back and read a comment. Communication is not applied to students receiving speech and language service. They do not have a hearing loss. I think, Carrie, that you're asking about that question. Maybe I didn't see this at first, so I'm sorry. So if the question about, let me go back a hot second. Does the child have communication needs? So yeah, okay. I thought, sorry, I didn't see that question until just now, so I apologize. So I know that I know most often people do check that for if their student has speech and language needs, if they do not have a hearing loss. And I think that that's okay that you check that. Again, if that item is checked, if someone is reviewing your IEP, they're going to look for that communication to be addressed in the IEP, right? Okay, sorry, I kind of went back a little bit because I didn't see that question up right at the first. Let me go back and talk about assistive technology consideration. Okay, all right, thanks. When we kind of get to this question in section 2 about assistive technology, we have the IEP asks us to consider and have a discussion of maybe potential AT devices and services that might be necessary for that student to receive FAPE. It can't be skipped over or just ignored. And this question is not just for students with severe disabilities. So just in those some examples I gave about some low-tech systems, certainly, a myriad of students can benefit from assistive technology. But we don't want to have a real long conversation about this. It shouldn't be any more than 10 or 15 minutes. So some things to think about for AT consideration is that we can only consider assistive technology after goals and objectives have been developed. And I understand that this is section 2 and we're not writing goals for a couple of more sections. Best practice would be to not answer this question until you've written goals and objectives and come back and answer this question. So many IEP revisions ago, this question used to be at the end of the IEP. I personally, Jennifer Heim, would like to see it back at the end of the IEP, but it is not. It's where it is in section 2 at this point. So you want to think about that IEP team should have at least one person with some knowledge about assistive technology devices and services, or where to turn to someone who might have that greater expertise when difficult questions arise. So just kind of facts to think about AT consideration. So some other things to think about is if that student is currently using an assistive technology tool, is that tool still adequate to address the new goals and objectives? Which is why we have to write those new goals first, right? Does the student need AT to access their curriculum? Does that student need a tool to access technology used by other students or access to instructional materials? So these are some questions that we need to think about. And maybe the biggest one on this slide is, could AT help a student be more independent in his or her learning environment? So, our overall goal is for kids to be as independent as possible upon graduation, and we need to help them get there. So there is, a quick little 4-step, it's called the Texas 4-step model in thinking about assistive technology consideration. Looking at present levels of performance and evaluation data, developing goals and objectives, determining if any of those tasks could be enhanced or more easily or more effectively completed with maybe an AT tool, and decide whether or not AT devices or services are required and document those decisions. Okay. Try to keep an eye on the chat. Thanks. So we can only make 3 decisions from AT consideration. Is 1, it's not needed. Needed and being already used successfully. AT is needed, but the team is unsure about specific technology. And that's where an AT assessment might come into play. We're not going to get into that today because that's outside the scope of what we're talking about. So, so the bottom line is if that box is checked yes on step 2 of the IEP, that the IEP team must also incorporate the assistive technology, either tool and or service appropriately within the body of the IEP. Okay. Any questions about that before I go on? Okay, fantastic. All right, the profile. Oh, I'm sorry. I think we skipped one. Does a child require special designed physical education? Obviously that I think that is a pretty self-explanatory question there. Okay. Let me get to where I am. All right. Okay, so in the profile, the team is going to want to summarize all relevant educational needs and performance of the child. So looking at that big picture, right? Summarize the interests and strengths and weaknesses of that student, progress on previous year's goals, some maybe relevant functional, academic, and behavior information, background information, including medical information, summarize how the student's disability affects their involvement and progress in the general education curriculum, and then summarize that student input. So what the profile shouldn't be is a copy and paste of the ETR, right? But it should be written in language understandable to all team members. So make sure, if there's any acronyms used in any of that information, you'll want to spell out what that acronym stands for and kind of define any of those terms, right? So as you know, all of this as I talked about, should be written in language understandable team members. When we talk about the required, so do you include their needs based off the ETR? Yes, absolutely. You include the needs. Not every student is going to have that most current ETR. That ETR might be a couple years old, right? But you'll certainly update that with current needs. But this section shouldn't just be a copy and paste of the ETR. So I started talking about the required members. And so to make sure that that language is understandable, we know that the required members are the parent, the general education teacher, the intervention specialist who provides SDI, special design instruction, a related service provider, the school representative, and someone who can interpret the instructional implications of the evaluation results. So again, anyone reading this section should be able to get a good picture of that student's strengths and needs, and what do we need to know about the student that won't go in that plot. Okay, all right. I think I talked about this a little bit. So this is just the profile continued. We're going to summarize the special instructional factors that are incorporated in the IEP, any recent assessments. In the case of students with multiple needs, perhaps where the team has to prioritize what those students' needs are. So this would be a great place to provide a summary of that student's prioritized needs. Any sensory, sensory impact on learning. And I think I mentioned before, any medical or safety needs. So that might be a duplicate. So we're not going to include a disability label here in this section, but it should paint that big picture of the student. Okay, and then kind of wrapping this up with section 4, extended school year services. So this question asks us to determine if ESY services, extended school year services are necessary. Make sure that we're not confusing ESY with compensatory education, right? Compensatory ed is in place when a student isn't, you said not to enter division in section 3. Yes, that's correct. Section 3 in the profile. So compensatory ed comes in play when the IEP isn't implemented as it was written. This comes into extended school year services come into play when we're thinking about preventing significant regression of skills or knowledge retained. Sometimes we're considering whether ESY services are necessary to avoid something more than adequate, what's called adequately recoupable regression. So ESY is considered with each goal. And okay, thank you, Danielle, for answering some questions. I didn't even see that yet. Thank you very much. So I put a link in there for an optional ESY decision-making form. So there's a lot of confusion and controversy around ESY. The most recent guidance from Office of Exceptional Children is that decisions should be based on the construct of skill regression and recruitment. And so ESY is determined that a student might regress in a critical skill area to such an extent that recoupment might take an unusually long period of time. So you might see other guidance that talks about not only regression, recoupment, or if there's a skill emerging, or the nature, the degree and nature of disability. Those might be other reasons for it to provide ESY. So as far as OEC is concerned, the Office for Exceptional Children, they're really focusing on that regression or recoupment of skills if it would take an unusually long period of time. But to also keep in mind that there's no requirement that a preschool student have previously attended school to determine the need for ESY. So there's a lot of things to consider there. Let me just click on this optional, the ESY decision-making form. So the link is there in that presentation, in the presentation. So this provides an ability to record what the baseline was at the end of the year, what progress was collected. It has checkpoints of September, December, and March, and then what that recruitment is by the end of October, by the end of January, and by the end of April. Okay, so you can take a look at that document. All right, and it looks like Danielle is answering all those questions in the chat. Thanks a bunch. Okay, all right. Any other questions before I go on? Okay, so I'm going to put this link in the chat, or maybe Stacy can do that for me. Thank you, Stacy. Again, it's out of my mouth and into the chat window. It's like magic. Okay. So please give us your feedback. We really do look at that and use that to inform our next session. And so speaking of our next session, I'll come back to this in a second, but our next session is January 18th and the 20th. And the topic is post-secondary transition. And since it's such a hot topic, we're going to devote 2 full sessions for that. So register for that on our website, sstr2.org. And then when you're there, you'll want to check out our other upcoming PD and networks. So you can look at these, you can either look at the event calendar or you can look at the catalog, which is a list. And the question is from Anthony, should we attend one or both? So that's going to be part 1 and part 2 of transition. So Danielle Holstreiger is going to take you through the transition section 5 of the IEP. And since it's such a dense content, she divided it into 2. So part 1 on Tuesday, part 2 on Thursday. Again, we are recording all of this. And they'll be posted on our website, actually on this PD on demand button right here is where all those will be posted. So if you can't hop on, if you're not able to be here, you'll be able to watch that recording. And Danielle, did you want to hop in and say something about that? I saw you.
Yep. Day 1 is going to be more focused on the goals in the beginning part. I'm going to break down the entire transition plan, and then day 2 is going to be more on the AATA. So I'm going to go into pretty depth into each section. So if you can attend both, great. But again, we'll be recording and you'll have the PowerPoint as well with my notes, and you can always reach out as well.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So the question is, what is the focus on the 18th? Can you say that again, Danielle?
The 18th is going to be more on goals. And then the 20th is going to be more on the AATA, the spin section.
Okay. So the 20th is age appropriate transition assessments and preferences, needs, interests. And that's be the 20th. Okay. So real quick, before we go on, a shameless plug for, I know there's many intervention specialists on today, so I apologize for the shameless plug. We are running a intervention specialist network. Our next Zoom session is January 26th. So you might have seen this more go out a week or so ago. And we're going to focus on, we're going to focus on behavior again in January, because what we're hearing from all of you is that behavior is a big area that needs a lot of support right now. So if you have a specific scenario you'd like to bring to the group, this is very much sharing and exchanging ideas with others that are in a similar role. It's very interactive. It's not sit and get. So it's 3 o'clock on January 26th, and you can register for that on our website. And I don't know if there's any more questions, feel free to unmute. And if you have anything else any burning questions, otherwise we appreciate you being here. And if you can please complete that survey, we would really appreciate it. We'll take a look at those so we can make this better for next time.
Hi, I just wanted to clarify some things. When you said for the amendment section, when you say district rep and parent, could that be the SLP and the parents?
Yes.
Okay, so that would be okay. All right.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the communication section, so if the child is just articulation, do we check that communication section or no?
So I always did.
Yeah.
You know, thinking of that may have changed by now. I don't know if anyone else on the call can weigh in on that. Yeah. So I'm happy to kind of double check with Office for Exceptional Children and get their current thinking. sometimes thinking changes there and guidance changes, right? So if you can throw your email in the chat, I will find out the answer for you like 100%, and I'll send it out to you.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Any other questions before we
Hey, I
sign
have
off?
a quick question if you don't mind, Jennifer. First, thank you so much for doing this with Danielle and your team. I appreciate it. I already learned something new right on that cover page, the checking the other and writing transition. And so I want to make sure that I'm communicating that to folks appropriately. Do you have, or could you share a little bit about the why? Like, where does that come from that we need to be doing that so that I can communicate it better for their buy-in?
Oh, so wait, let me make sure I just heard you
Are
correctly.
you referring to the checking for transition?
Yeah, all the way back on that cover page, one of the first things you mentioned where we check other and write transition.
Oh,
Just a little bit about the why on why we're doing that and where you're getting the rules and regulations for it. Like, is it something that is in our operating standards, or like, where did that come from?
hang on, let
So
me
the
get
why of it is, and I'm going to go over this more in detail next week when I go over that transition plan. The moment that a transition plan is put into place in the IEP, that is what pretty much dictates the IEP. The whole point of the IEP is to prepare our students, right, for post-secondary. And because sometimes there is a transition plan added before they're 14 in certain circumstances, we just want that to be clarified. It's just like on that the invite page, also making sure that it's marked that it's that transition plan. So again, I'm going to go in more detail with it. If you want, I can kind of send you where that is, but
I can look forward to that on the
practice
18th and the
that
20th.
transition plan is included, because in an annual review, a transition plan is not always in it. So that's telling a team right off the bat, this kid is turning 14, or perhaps again at age 12, if a team wants to go ahead and put a transition plan in place early, they have the right to do that.
Okay, so it's just like a double check, because we're also marking that on the other part of the cover page where it says they're 14 or they're younger than 14 and have a transition.
here.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That's fine. And I look forward to hearing more about it on the 18th and the 20th. Thanks, Danielle.
No problem.
Okay. All right. Any other questions? If there's anyone still on from Office of Exceptional Children that has any clarification, feel free to unmute and chime in. We're happy to have you. Okay. All right. Well, thanks so much.
So Jennifer, I do have a question.
Okay.
Back on the cover page with the District of Residence and Service.
Uh-huh.
So just for example, so let's say Avon Lake is the District of Residence.
Okay.
But Johnny is attending school in Westlake on one of the scholarships.
Okay.
What is the District of Service then for that section?
So the District of Service would be Westlake,
Okay.
and the District of Residence would be Avon Lake.
Yeah, that was what I wanted clarification on.
Yeah, and there, those scenarios can get really complicated,
Right.
right? Yeah, I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. So, I think the best thing is just think about that definition of what the District of Residence is in the District of Service, and then to be able to think it through. Right?
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay. Any other questions before we sign off? I don't see any others in the chat. Okay. Haley, you're quite welcome. Okay. All right. All right. Well, thanks so much. We appreciate you all being on today, and we'll see you perhaps as soon as next Tuesday. if you're interested in transition. So thanks so much.